Assalamu alaikum. Tiebe forna algono mihado migenesteni haringodo terega nitric oxide
Of
upladda
nitric oxide,
adi egin
which should
harigana
not be
kuran faade
confused
de
with
hegoto
nitrous
mi Nobel
oxide.
Prize
That's laughing
winner
gas,
mi
and
nitric
that's what's
oxide
used in the
haringodo kuran
dentist's
faade
office, for
mi
example,
discover kori
to relieve pain.
scientist
Nitric oxide, although
Dr.
it sounds the
Riske
same, is a
wahakabla
totally
esko
different
adi
molecule.
nitric
And
oxide ufadduma
what we
algono mu
discovered was that
na
our
koridana
arteries,
exercise
our
ka de hegoto
endothelial cells that line the arteries, actually make this nitric oxide. And what nitric oxide does is phenomenal. It's a vasodilator, which means it widens the arteries. And when it does that, it lowers the blood pressure. It improves blood flow to different organs because you're dilating the arteries. And in addition, this nitric oxide can keep the inner lining of the arteries healthy so that blood does not clot when it's not supposed to in the arteries. Also, it prevents cholesterol plaques from depositing in the arteries. So, as long as you keep making nitric oxide in those endothelial cells, it will keep your vascular system very healthy. So, one of the reasons we make nitric oxide is to protect our cardiovascular systems against high blood pressure, stroke, and heart attack. The way it forms is that when a bolt of lightning zaps through the air, it causes a chemical reaction between nitrogen and oxygen. That's N and O to form NO. That's nitric oxide, and it remains a gas in the atmosphere. Now, nitric oxide itself, we've learned, is not the dangerous aspect, is not the dangerous gas in the atmosphere. What is dangerous is that nitric oxide, being very unstable, reacts with oxygen in the air to form nitrogen dioxide, or NO2. Another name for that is acid rain. That's is what's toxic, of course, will kill you. And if you fly on a plane and you go over any industrial city like Los Angeles, New York, or especially Beijing in China, you see a brown gas hovering over the city. That's all NO2, but guess what? It came from NO. So NO is the starting material, and the environment is loaded with NO. And because of that reaction, nobody in his right mind was thinking that our bodies could make nitric oxide for any useful reason. It's only because I stepped outside the box and reasoned that, perhaps we do make it. I looked for it. I was lucky. We found it, and the rest is history. Many of my friends and neighbors would have cardiovascular disease and not live very long, whereas an equal number would be perfectly healthy and live normal lives. So the obvious question to me, you see, as a kid, I asked lots of questions. I drove my friends crazy. I drove my parents crazy, everybody crazy, and especially the teachers. They used to ask me to sit down and just come after class to ask them the questions. But, why did some people get these diseases and some not? So after taking a lot of courses and getting into college, I came up with my own idea, which was not based on any scientific evidence whatsoever. I just thought maybe, just maybe, our bodies produce a molecule that protects us against cardiovascular disease. Some of us make a lot of this molecule, some of us don't. And those who do not make sufficient quantities of this molecule might develop cardiovascular disease. I kept this in my mind, Drew, throughout my college, medical, and graduate education until I was working as a professor. And eventually, I found that molecule, which is nitric oxide. So the moral of that story is never give up. We don't know how. And then but mainly other investigators, found that nitric oxide is made by an enzymatic reaction in the body. It's very simple. We eat protein. Proteins are digested to amino acids, and each of the 20 amino acids has a different function in the body. But we have one amino acid called arginine, which is extremely important because arginine is what this enzyme uses to make nitric oxide. The enzyme is very appropriately called NO synthase. Okay, so the NO synthase binds arginine, which has a lot of nitrogens on it, and it takes one of them off and it makes it into nitric oxide. So our body uses enzymes, one enzyme, to make nitric oxide. And once that was discovered, then it was really easy to ski down the slopes to figure out how we could make more nitric oxide to keep us healthy. What are the problems associated with inadequate nitric oxide? How can we make more nitric oxide? What does a healthy diet have to do with nitric oxide, and so on? So you know how science is. One discovery leads to another, until finally you can figure out the entire puzzle. Shortly thereafter, we showed that if you don't have enough NO, you'll get hypertension, you'll get high blood pressure, because the arteries make nitric oxide to keep the blood pressure down in the normal range. As soon as you start blocking production of NO, hypertension. Same thing, if you block the production of nitric oxide, you can get a stroke because you get blood clotting occurring unnaturally in the brain. If the blood clots unnaturally in the coronary arteries of the heart, you get a heart attack. So NO is required to maintain those functions. Also, if you have inadequate NO, we know now, based on another discovery we made in the early 90s, that males will develop impotence or erectile dysfunction. But let's not leave the ladies out. Ladies who make inadequate amounts of NO will also suffer from erectile dysfunction in the form of they lose their sensual or sexual arousal. They lose sexual arousal,
the libido,
when the nitric oxide levels come down. And the other aspect of it, of course, something that you're an expert in, it's called the brain. The brain depends so heavily on nitric oxide for numerous functions. The most important functions we know about NO in the brain is that the nitric oxide promotes learning, memory recall, recalling information in the memory, and also just you remembering facts and so on. The other point that I always make to graduate students and young investigators is that the brain has more nitric oxide in it than does the rest of the body. And we don't really know why. All we know is that NO in the brain promotes memory recall, learning, and so on. But there's got to be more functions. You know, I think NO is important in the brain to dilate all the blood vessels, to keep the blood circulating in the brain, to keep the delivery of oxygen and nutrients going to the brain. And when you dilate arteries, you also promote the removal or washout of metabolites that can injure the brain, just like they would in your muscles when you're working. And so I personally believe that the nitric oxide is one of the most important signaling molecules in the brain. You know, and it was made about 15 years ago from actually a couple of great friends of mine, party friends of mine, in Stockholm, Sweden, at the Karolinska Hospital. What they discovered, they were looking at asthmatics, and they were trying to measure, you know, how much nitric oxide is in the exhaled breath of asthmatics. And those studies, well, they worked out okay, but what they discovered, what I'm trying to say is what they discovered in those studies, doing various manipulations, is that when one breathes through the nose into the lungs, that air has a very high concentration of NO gas. When you breathe in through the mouth, there's no NO gas. And so the idea was, the question came up, of course, logically, why is that air that comes through the nose full of nitric oxide. And they found that the nasal mucosal cells in the nose is complicated inside, and those nasal cells make lots of nitric oxide gas, okay? And when you breathe in through your nose, that nitric oxide gas goes into the lungs. And they figured out three things. One, that when you breathe in the NO, the nitric oxide is what we call a smooth muscle relaxing agent. In other words, when the nitric oxide hits the tracheal smooth muscle and the bronchiole smooth muscle, it relaxes it. So the trachea and the bronchioles widen so that more air can get in the lungs. The other thing NO does when you breathe in through the nose is it reaches the pulmonary circulation. So all the small pulmonary arteries, capillaries, and so on, they all dilate in order to increase blood flow to the lungs. And, Mother Nature is very smart. Of course you want to do that. You want to get more blood in the lungs so that there's more blood to pick up oxygen. You want to dilate the bronchioles to get more air and therefore more oxygen in the lungs. And you can get a much better oxygen extraction from the lungs into the blood by breathing in through your nose. And then, of course, the blood will carry the circulation carries the oxygenated blood through the rest of the body. But the third thing that was found actually a few years later was that nitric oxide is antimicrobial as well. Nitric oxide is a reactive free radical, so it can kill certain microbes. It can react covalently with certain components of bacteria, parasites, and yes, viruses, and yes, coronavirus. And when the nitric oxide does that, it kills those microbes, let me call them microbes, and prevents them from multiplying, okay? And that's how breathing in through your nose, protects us against everyday, influenzas and all kinds of infections that can occur because there's so much garbage in the air. And so I believe, as you do, I think, it's essential when you're inhaling to inhale through the nose.
So this is the exercise I'm going to show you about nitric oxide. When people get old, the production of nitric oxide will get down. So you have to do some exercise and some other techniques are there to produce nitric oxide in the body, in the arteries and well. So I'm going to show you how to do this nitric oxide special exercise. Okay, so 3 minute exercise, one set, 4 exercises. So I'm starting. Okay, first one is like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is one set. Daily we have to do 3 sets, 3 times. So total daily we have to spend only 3 minutes. This exercise will produce nitric oxide in the body, and it will have very good benefits for the overall health of the body. So if you don't have time to go to gym and do some exercises, this is the best thing you can do. Spend 3 minutes and do this one. This is the best exercise to produce nitric oxide in the body. Thank you very much.